Hi, I'm Marla. I'm the younger daughter, the one my father says couldn't handle structure. The same father who gave a standing ovation at my sister's promotion, called her the legacy, the only one who mattered. But when her husband looked across the room and said, "Greetings, Colonel," he wasn't talking to her, he was saluting me. I was the one who signed her promotion, the one they erased. They pretended I failed. But what happens when the person they've buried quietly stands up? Would you stay silent if the people meant to protect you rewrote your history just to preserve their pride? Let me tell you what they did to me and how I made sure it would never happen again. I should have known better than to expect a name tag. Fort Sam Houston was humming with brass-tone nostalgia that evening. White linen tables, crisp dress uniforms, the kind of spring air that made you forget Texas could burn. My boots didn't echo when I walked in. Civilian shoes don't command attention, especially when no one expects you to show up. At the entrance, a second lieutenant with an unsure smile double-checked the clipboard. "Name?" he asked, glancing at my plain gray blouse. His tone didn't carry doubt, just a preloaded script. I answered, and he hesitated just long enough to make it obvious. The pause stretched, snapped back, then he nodded and waved me through. Polite dismissal, nothing overt. But I caught it. Inside, the room had that particular hum of selective memory. Photos looped on a projector, Callista in uniform, in formation, in full military glow. Not a single image of me, not one. And the reception table didn't have my name, no Cole Salam. Everly. Just a hand-scrawled card someone slid in front of a folding chair. Overflow, staff. Placed right next to the restroom door, subtle, almost theatrical. I took my seat. The plastic creaked under me, another unwelcome sound in a room rehearsed for perfection. Across the floor, I saw Garrett, my father, laughing too loudly. He hadn't seen me yet, or maybe he had, and simply decided not to react. Somewhere near the bread table, Callista was being hugged by an older officer. She looked polished, decisive, everything they wanted to show off tonight. I sat quietly, my back straight, and pulled the invitation from my coat pocket. The envelope had been slightly crumpled, the ink smudged on the name, M. Everly. Not even the courtesy of the correct spelling, and not a typo either. He used to write it that way when he wanted to make a point. "You were always more idea than outcome, kid." I didn't flinch. I simply tucked the envelope back into my coat and let the silence do what it always did, make room for my anger to focus. No one had asked where I'd been all these years. And no one was about to. A cousin I hadn't seen since high school passed by and mistook me for catering. "Oh, sorry. You looked like one of the staff." She smiled without pause and kept moving. I didn't stop her. Why bother? From my peripheral, I saw my mother, Irene. She noticed me. Her eyes softened for a second, but her feet didn't move. She just blinked and turned back toward the main table, the kind of recognition that still kept me invisible. I watched Garrett toast Callista like she was the first woman to ever wear a uniform. She represents discipline, direction. She chose the right path, he said, lifting his glass as if that phrase hadn't been a knife the last time he used it on me. Around him, the room clapped, and he smiled, like a man who'd finally set the record straight. The event program listed every major contributor to Callista's promotion: officers, mentors, family. My name was missing, though I'd signed off on the clearance myself 2 months ago, under my operational title, no fanfare, no override, just duty. There was no seat for that story here. A tall man in uniform approached me near the hallway between the kitchen and the hallway to the garden. He looked vaguely familiar, nodded respectfully, then moved on. Probably didn't place me, just recognized the posture. You can take the rank off the collar, but not out of the spine. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course. Fort Sam's main hall was practically designed to keep certain communications out, especially unapproved ones. It occurred to me that maybe this entire event had been planned like a social firewall. One story celebrated, others omitted by architecture. The lights dimmed, projector hum. My sister's face filled the room. Boot camp, field training, smiling, saluting. And no grainy footage, all curated, all Callista. That's when I felt it, a faint vibration against my ribs. Not my phone. A secure patch sewn inside the lining of my blazer had just triggered 2 seconds of light. 1 sentence on the internal feed. Clearance log triggered. Rank match. Confirmed. Observer present. Someone else had recognized my signature, even if the people in this room refused to. I looked across the hall. Jonas Keene stood near the corner stage exit. His eyes were locked on mine. No confusion, just certainty. They say the hardest thing to watch is someone else live the life you were forced to surrender. I used to think that was a dramatic take, until I sat in that folding chair again, right next to the restroom, pretending the plastic didn't dig into my ribs every time I shifted. People kept arriving. The room filled with crisp uniforms, polite laughter, silver clinking against porcelain. It smelled like polished brass and overcooked roast beef. A band played something vaguely patriotic near the stage, just loud enough to drown awkward silences. Callista moved from table to table like she was hosting a diplomatic summit. She wore her confidence like a name tag, the kind I didn't get. She passed right by me, not a glance, not even a twitch of recognition. You'd think I was a wall fixture. Maybe to her, I was. When someone steps over you long enough, they stop noticing the step. The microphone crackled. Garrett walked to the podium like it was built for him. The room gave him their eyes. He loved that. Always did. He cleared his throat, smiled, then launched into his tribute. She represents everything we hoped our children would become, he said, gesturing proudly toward Callista. Not every path is easy, and not all our children choose to serve with the same clarity of purpose, but some rise anyway. He paused, just long enough to look my way. I didn't flinch, but I saw at least 3 people glance toward me, then quickly away. The room chuckled, just enough to show they'd caught the jab. Garrett sipped his water, like he hadn't just spit on my career in a starched shirt. He never hits hard, but always aims for the softest part. Funny how the proudest men can shame their daughters without raising their voice. I caught Irene's eyes across the room. Just for a second. Her face didn't change. No smile, no nod. She looked away again, like she was trying to remember if the green beans needed stirring. Her silence had always been a soft permission for the way things were. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent, Eleanor Roosevelt once said, unless you were raised to think silence was consent. The lights dimmed for the slideshow. I braced myself, not because I thought I'd see myself up there, but because I knew I wouldn't, and I needed to be ready. Photos of Callista at 2 years old in a baby camo onesie. Callista on her first bike. Callista with Garrett pinning her first rank. Her deployment photos played like a recruitment video. Flags in the background, dust on her boots, medals on her chest. Irene stood in a few shots too, back when she wore a uniform of her own. Not a single frame of me, not even the standard academy headshot, not the commissioning photo, not my first mission brief, or the commendation I got in Thailand. You'd think I didn't exist. People clapped at every slide change. A neighbor whispered to his wife, didn't he have 2 daughters? Her reply was louder than she meant it to be. Not that he ever talks about. I gripped the water glass so tight I thought it might crack. My commissioning ceremony had been in a smaller hall than this. No music, no slideshow. Garrett had RSVP'd and never showed. I became my own archive. They erased me before I even left. Callista walked to the podium as the music faded. She looked poised, grateful, polished. The words floated around me like fog. I didn't hear them. Couldn't. My ears were ringing from the storm building in my chest. Garrett clapped loudest. That figured. From the side of the room, Jonas stood motionless. His eyes kept flickering toward me, curious, uneasy, like someone who just realized the ghost in the room wasn't dead. I met his glance once. He looked away, but not before I saw the gears turning. Sometimes the only thing louder than applause is omission. The slideshow looped again. Same smiles, same flags, same history told the same way. I stood up, quietly. No one noticed. I walked the long way around the room, passing behind the dessert table, the drink station, the framed certificates mounted like relics. I didn't stop to read them. Just before I reached the side exit, I heard Jonas's voice, not loud, not panicked, just curious. She's not just here for dinner. I didn't turn around, but my hand brushed the inner lining of my jacket, right where my clearance badge was hidden. 7 years ago, I stood in front of a mirror, dressed in a cadet uniform that still had creases from the duffel bag. The fluorescent dorm light flickered overhead as I folded my field gear with hands steadier than they had any right to be. Silence hung in the room. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that presses in from all sides. It was the night before I was supposed to leave. Leave quietly, without complaint, without an incident. They told me to leave quietly, I remember whispering to no one. So I did. I made the silence deafening. I lined up my boots, folded the last shirt, then picked up the clipboard from my bunk. The withdrawal form was waiting, blank in all the wrong places. My name was pre-filled. The reason for departure field, empty. I had walked to the admin office that afternoon thinking maybe there would be a mistake. Maybe someone would hand me a different version, one that included nuance, explanation, fairness. I'd earned that much, at least. Instead, a young administrator, no older than me but already hardened by routine, had glanced at my file and slid the paper across the table. I asked, "Can I write in command retaliation?" She didn't look up. "It's cleaner if you just check personal reasons." I checked the box, signed my name, walked out. I didn't slam the door. That would have been a protest, and I wasn't allowed that. No noise, no mark, no disruption. Now, 7 years later, I was sitting in my car outside the very same building where my sister was being celebrated. The ceremony was still echoing in my ears, but it wasn't what stayed with me. It was the weight of the folder in my lap, my own digital terminal logged into a secure Orion access panel. There it was again, my training record. Same redacted summary, same neat lines that said nothing. The parts that mattered weren't erased, they were rewritten. I scrolled through layers of access logs, protocol pings, silent review stamps, all sterile. All official, all lies. Then a soft ping. Not a system alert, an external message, encrypted. It came through a side channel not used since I'd left the field. "You should see what I found in my old drive." The message came from a fellow cadet I hadn't spoken to in years. She was one of the few who'd ever asked what happened to me. The attachment was small, a PDF, labeled Draft Record Op Kilo 7 Everly Org. I opened it slowly. A training report, unaltered. The mission was a field exercise gone wrong. Our commanding officer had issued a direct order to proceed. Despite intel suggesting the terrain was active, I had called an audible, pulled 3 cadets back at the last second before they walked into a simulation that had escalated into live fire exposure. No one got hurt, but the CO's plan was exposed as flawed, sloppy. The original report described my action as immediate, risk-based judgment with preventative, life-saving impact. It cited me by name. The final version, the one they filed later, it called my actions insubordination under stress. I stared at the timestamps, the edits, the notes in the margins, and then I saw it. In the metadata, buried under the digital signature line. Approval override, G. Winslow. He hadn't just let it happen. He'd signed off on the rewrite. My father, Garrett Winslow, the man who toasted my sister like she'd invented leadership. So it wasn't enough to be disappointed in me. He needed the file to say it too. The steering wheel creaked under my grip. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I tapped once, pulled the document into an offline encrypted container, labeled it Echo Retained, and backed it up to 3 secure locations. 1 copy, 1 truth, 1 message. He built a version of me that suited his legacy. Time to build mine. The lights were already lowered when I stepped back into the hall. The program had shifted into its final phase, Callista's official acknowledgement speech. I didn't expect a spotlight to land on me, or even a whisper of recognition. I stood near the back wall, behind the dessert trays and forgotten gift table, right where shadows mingled with decor. They didn't see me. That was the point. Callista stood at the center of the stage, face bathed in amber light. Her hair was pinned with military precision, her uniform flawless. She looked every bit the success Garrett wanted her to be, and she played the part perfectly. I wouldn't be standing here today without my unit, my mentors, she began, her voice clear and measured, and my incredible father, who showed me what service and integrity really mean. Applause filled the room. She paused, turning slightly toward Garrett, her smile softening just enough to seem sincere. And to the chain of command who believed in me, even before I believed in myself, you're the reason I got here. Not a glance in my direction. Her words didn't cut because they were sharp. They cut because they didn't even acknowledge the target. They were the kind of thank yous built for photo ops and newsletters. The kind that rewrite history by omission. I stood still, listening, watching. They always assume you'll take it in silence until your silence turns tactical. After the speech, the room broke into mingling and casual wine sipping. Guests wandered toward a display near the side entrance, a tribute corner filled with old medals, plaques, and uniforms. I followed behind them, curious. That's when I saw it. My uniform, pressed, displayed on a mannequin. Exact ribbon placement, same insignia, same wear pattern on the left shoulder from my rifle sling, but the nameplate didn't say Everly, it said C. Moreno. A mistake. No, the stitching was too new. The pins too deliberate. Someone had lifted my old set from archived inventory, rebranded it, and used it to pad my sister's timeline. I stared at it. Not shocked, just unsurprised. A voice beside me, low and familiar. That's not hers, is it? I turned to find Lieutenant Bradley, now a mid-grade officer, once my underclassman. He glanced around, uneasy. His eyes dropped to the mannequin, then back to me. I shrugged. She wears the story better. He didn't laugh, just nodded once and moved along. I didn't move, not right away. I let people pass me, saw them read the name tag without question. Nobody asked how C. Moreno had earned campaign medals from operations she never touched. They weren't looking for truth, they were looking for decor. Later, near the coffee station, someone touched my elbow. Marla? I turned. Captain Harris. We'd trained together once, years ago. He looked older, fuller in the face, but still carried that same tension in his shoulders. I almost didn't recognize you, he said, awkward smile playing at his mouth. I get that a lot, I replied. He gestured toward the banquet. This is something, big deal. For some more than others. He shifted on his feet. I heard bits back then about why you left. Back then, I echoed. Did you believe it? He didn't answer right away. Finally, I didn't know what to believe. It was all quiet. I nodded. That wasn't by accident. He swallowed, looked away. Maybe it's better left where it is. I leaned in slightly, voice low. Some ghosts are easier to honor than to explain, right? He winced, visibly, then muttered something about needing to check in with his wife. I didn't stop him. I didn't need his apology. I needed him to sit with the fact that I was still here. After that, I walked through the crowd again. This time slower. I didn't speak, didn't wave, but I passed by Garrett and Callista's table. Garrett noticed. He adjusted his cufflink, pretending it was about the fabric. Callista kept laughing, louder than before. Sometimes your presence is more confrontational than a fight. I left through the side door. My car was still parked near the perimeter fence, tucked beneath the shade of an old oak. I climbed in, exhaled, and pulled my secure device from the center console. One file, one report, one future. I uploaded it to a protected Orion node, labeled the protocol Retaliation 001, and typed, authored by Colonel M. Everly, previously omitted. I watched the bar complete, and I wasn't done being omitted yet. I stepped out through the west side corridor, letting the noise of the banquet dissolve behind me. The air outside was still warm, holding on to the last remnants of sun. My boots echoed on the tiled walkway, sharp, lonely sounds that no one turned to acknowledge. Near the catering entrance, a young lieutenant approached. He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe even offer a nod. But halfway through the motion, he stopped. His eyes flicked to my collar, then to my face, and finally to the ground. He muttered something about needing to check on the cake service and veered off without another word. Recognition has a smell. That wasn't it. That was fear of being seen with me. I kept walking, not with purpose, but with weight, as if my silence was meant to leave footprints. As I rounded the edge of the building, a voice, his voice, cut through the stillness. She's not active anymore, Garrett said to a man I didn't recognize. That's just her showing up. Don't read into it. I stopped at the edge of the concrete, still hidden from view. I didn't need to hear more. I'd heard it all before, just never this publicly. My own father spinning truth into omission like a seasoned craftsman. I walked into view slowly, deliberately, making sure my lapel badge, government-issued, secured to my civilian coat, was fully visible. Garrett's eyes met mine for a split second before darting away. The man beside him said nothing. The silence between them was agreement. They expect you to beg for a seat. They're not ready when you bring your own table. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I walked past them, chin level, eyes forward, as if they were ghosts from another life, and I was done mourning them. Out in the side garden, I spotted someone I hadn't seen in years, Trevor Clark. Once a peer at the academy, now sporting a bronze pin that meant he'd climbed comfortably through the administrative ladder. He was leaning against a stone pillar, sipping from a glass, pretending not to recognize me. "It's been years," he said as I stopped in front of him. "7," I replied. He gave a tight smile, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. "I always thought you left to pursue something different. Private sector, maybe?" That's what they told you? I said, crossing my arms. He glanced around. Well, I figured. I mean, you were always sharp. You didn't seem like the burnout type. No, I said evenly. But you seemed like the keep your head down and stay promotable type. Guess we both lived up to expectations. He shifted. It was complicated back then. Politics. Trevor, you always knew why I left, I said. You just needed me to be gone enough so your silence didn't look like a choice. He looked like I'd struck him, not physically, but in a way that made him feel seen in the worst light. I should, go grab another drink, he mumbled, retreating into the safety of the hall. I didn't follow. I made my way back inside, drifting along the outer edge of the main event like a ghost. No one stopped me, but I felt the tension ripple as I passed. Garrett looked away. Callista caught my eye from across the room. She was in the middle of speaking to a brigadier general, but she faltered for a split second, like a static charge had jumped between us. We all used to salute the same flag. Now they salute their own silence. I didn't break stride. Outside again, I made my way to the parking lot, unlocking my car with a quiet chirp. The dashboard lit up. I pulled out my encrypted comms device and initiated a secure session. Proceed with next flag level transmission. Observer has confirmed. My thumb hovered for a second. Then I hit send. No alarms blared, no fireworks, but something had shifted, and there was no reversing it. As I turned to close the driver's door, I caught movement to my right. Jonas stepped from behind a row of parked cars, a folder tucked under one arm. His jaw was tight, his stance hesitant. I think you'll want to see this, he said quietly. I accepted the folder and opened it. Inside were printed emails, screenshots of internal communications, correspondence between Garrett and senior officers regarding my report. One message stood out. Adjust her language to imply instability, not enough to flag, just enough to discredit if it resurfaces. The sender was Garrett. I looked up at Jonas. You were never supposed to be involved. He didn't flinch. You weren't supposed to be erased either. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was standing alone. The courtyard echoed with synchronized boots slapping against gravel as Callista led her unit through a demo drill. Guests lined the patio edges, coffee cups in hand, chatting with the polite boredom of people waiting to clap at the right time. I stood near a column, still, folded into the fringe of the scene. No uniform, no introduction, just presence. I watched her bark orders with that polished tone I'd once taught her, back when she still thought rank was something earned, not inherited. Callista had always moved like she had a mirror watching, even in the field. She snapped into commands as if each one was designed to be photographed. Then it happened. Jonas peeled away from a huddle of officers. No announcement, no subtlety. He made his way toward me, eyes fixed, posture sharp. When he stopped 3 feet in front of me, the courtyard hushed, unsure of what they were witnessing. He stood tall, spine aligned, and raised his hand to his brow. "Greetings, Colonel Everly," he said, loud, clear, like he wanted the words to land. And land they did. Conversation stopped. Even the boots faltered. Callista, mid-order, lost her rhythm for a beat. Garrett, flanked by advisors, blinked but kept his face still. But I saw the shift, how his knuckles tightened around the paper cup in his hand, how his lips parted just slightly, looking for a lie quick enough to hold together his version of things. I held his gaze long enough to remind him I didn't need to raise my voice. I only needed to exist. You want silence? Here's how it turns on you. A low murmur spread among the crowd. She outranks Callista? I thought she left. That's the colonel from Division 9. Garrett leaned toward an aide. She's not listed as active command. The colonel beside him replied without hesitation. That's because her record isn't public, sir. I didn't smirk, didn't nod. I let the weight of those 3 words, Colonel Marla Everly, settle like dust on polished glass. The kind of truth that clings even after you try to wipe it away. As the drill ended, a young soldier approached me, hesitant at first, then steady. "You taught me how to read wind direction on a live field," she said quietly. I remembered her, not by name, but by instinct. The way she carried herself reminded me of the cadets who learned because they had to, not because they wanted stripes. I nodded. She looked back at the formation. "They only see the rank," she said. "But I remember the field." "That's why you'll make it," I told her. "Because you remember the dirt, not just the medals." Callista came back inside not long after, her face unreadable. She passed me by the information table. No words, no glance, just silence, packed so tight it could have split marble. Her hands were trembling. Irene stood in a corner, unmoving. I saw her watch me, then look away when our eyes almost met. I picked up the printed program from the desk and flipped through it. Nothing. Not a mention, not a line, not even a courtesy title. You'd think I hadn't existed. I left through the rear patio, walking slowly toward my car as the sun began its descent, tinting the glass with a faint gold that made the whole place look warmer than it was. From my coat pocket, I pulled my encrypted Orion device, typed in a single command, "Seen." I didn't need a podium. I had proof. And presence. Sometimes being noticed isn't victory. Letting them sit in their own uncertainty is. The lounge off the main corridor had always been quiet, one of those semi-private places meant for tired officers, not secrets. But as I stood alone near the frosted glass window, a notification pulsed through my secure relay. No vibration, no sound, just a soft blink in the corner of my device. Transmission intercepted, original destination, call, M, Everly. Final delivery, G, Winslow. My jaw tensed. It wasn't a technical error. It was a choice, a clean reroute, intentional, fast. Someone had diverted a classified document, one that should have landed in my queue, into the hands of the man who'd spent a lifetime reshaping my existence to fit his version of honor. I found a bench, sat, and connected my device into the back-end logs through a wireless Orion node patched to my credentials. The screen blinked once, twice, then opened. The document was labeled, Request for Permanent Recognition, Command Elevation, C. Moreno. It was the promotion authorization that should have been flagged for my review and clearance. My name was on the routing trail, but not the signature line. That had been overwritten, signed, G. Winslow. Date, 3 days before I was even notified of Callista's nomination. I cross-checked the metadata, manual insertion, not a system autofill, not a proxy key, a deliberate overwrite. This wasn't a mistake. It was a maneuver. I leaned back against the vinyl seat and watched people pass by the hallway, oblivious. The way you pass by fire alarms when there's no smoke, until it's too late. A rustle in my peripheral vision pulled my attention. At the far end of the hall, just inside the archway, stood a woman in civilian clothes. Dark blazer, hands folded, no name tag, no visible badge. But her stance gave her away. Not military, not family, audit division, the kind of observer who doesn't blink, the kind who isn't here to applaud or participate, only to watch. Civilians walk differently. Watchdogs never blink. Our eyes met briefly. She didn't nod, didn't move, just held my gaze for a half second too long. Then she turned and vanished through the side stairwell like smoke. I closed the device. Garrett was on the move. Back in the central hall, I spotted him across the room near the guest bar, shaking hands with a retired general from the advisory board. His smile looked thinner now, like it was held up by thread. He leaned in close, speaking with that familiar quiet urgency. He knew, not about the audit agent maybe, but he knew the threads were fraying. I watched his body language shift, slightly more contained, more strategic. His political instincts were kicking in. He was weaving his fallback net before the system caught up to him. He wasn't just protecting Callista anymore. He was protecting himself. I left the hall without another glance. Once I reached the parking lot, I climbed into my car, waited for the interior lights to dim, then activated my secure console. The folder labeled Echo Retained now had a new file, the forged promotion document and all its metadata. I compiled timestamps, overlaid the forgery path, highlighted signature discrepancies. I wasn't building a case. I was laying a foundation. You don't bring a grenade to a courtroom. You bring a record. I encrypted everything under the directive, RET Protocol, Layer 2, and sent it to Orion's internal investigations team, unofficially first. Just enough to spark questions, just enough to make silence impossible. The air in the car grew still as the file transferred. When I stepped out of the vehicle to stretch, something fluttered on my windshield. Tucked under the wiper blade, plain white paper. I looked around. No one nearby. The note read, "Careful what you unbury. Some names get heavier when spoken." No signature. No handwriting I recognized, just a warning from someone who knew the ground was shifting. I folded the paper slowly, deliberately, and slid it into the inside pocket of my coat. No fear in my chest. Just calculation. If they wanted a ghost, they forgot ghosts leave footprints too. The applause was still ringing in my ears when I stepped back into the reception hall, envelope in hand. The last of the speeches had ended, the audience still in their seats out of respect, or habit. Glasses clinked, silverware tapped against porcelain, but it all faded beneath the weight of what I was about to do. I didn't rush. I walked slow, steady, a calculated rhythm that made space for attention without asking for it. People turned. A few recognized me now, not as a ghost in the back row, but as someone worth following with their eyes. I felt the hush move like a ripple across the crowd. Garrett, mid-conversation, froze when he saw me approaching. Callista turned too, her eyes flicking from my face to the envelope I carried. Black, unmarked, but heavy in presence. I didn't say a word. I placed it on the podium directly in front of Garrett and Callista. My fingers didn't shake. My face didn't twitch. I gave them nothing. The room responded with instinctive silence. No one asked what it was, but they all wanted to know. Garrett leaned closer, brow furrowed. He opened it just enough to see the top of the letterhead, Orion Division. He blanched. Callista reached forward and pulled the paper fully out. Her name was there. So was mine. Authorization for her promotion. Signed, Cole. Marla Everly, Strategic Division Authority. Callista's lips parted slightly. Her hands tightened on the page. She looked up, and I saw it. The unraveling. The camera crew caught it too. The screen behind her still glowed faintly with her photo loop, but now her shocked face reflected back to the audience. "You signed this?" she asked, barely audible. I nodded once. That was all it needed. "You climbed the ladder I rebuilt after he pulled mine," I said clearly. Gasps didn't come, but the tension thickened. People looked to Garrett for a reaction. He opened his mouth, but I beat him to it, with silence. Just one glance, sharp and final. He closed his lips and looked away. That was enough. Some guests clapped, confused maybe, but others watched Garrett too closely, wondering what else had been edited, rewritten, covered. Jonas stepped beside me, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't speak, just stood, a silent confirmation that everything I'd said without saying was true. A retired general I hadn't seen in years leaned toward another officer and muttered, "She's the one from Echelon Review, isn't she?" Another whisper followed, "She's higher than all of them." I didn't smile. I didn't have to. The energy shifted. It was no longer celebration. It was reckoning. Callista stepped down from the stage slowly, no applause following her. She didn't cry. Her hands were white-knuckled, her mouth tight. She left the spotlight without a word, without a backward glance. Irene stared at the podium, then at Garrett. But she didn't move. She didn't follow her daughter. I stood there one breath longer than I needed to. Then I turned and walked out. Outside, the night had cooled. Finally, I climbed into my car, closed the door, and let the quiet settle. Then came the ping, response protocol, promotion flagged for review. Source, internal oversight. I didn't need to respond. I didn't need to explain. When you've been erased, the loudest revenge is simply being undeniable. The morning after the banquet, my phone was already awake before I was. Buzzes, pings, notification banners layered over one another like a nervous stack of shuffled cards. My inbox was full. Group threads, veiled curiosity wrapped in cordial language, subtle check-ins disguised as concern. But one message sat alone, marked unread, simple and quiet. From Irene. "You didn't have to do that in public. No punctuation. Just judgment soaked in restraint." I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. The weight didn't hit me right away. It crept up slowly, like fog in a hallway, turning everything hazy and harder to breathe through. I got dressed in silence, laced my boots tighter than necessary, and headed outside. The base perimeter was already alive with activity. Cadets ran drills, clipboards shuffled in the hands of junior officers. I kept my pace steady along the walking path behind the administrative building. I didn't have a destination in mind, just a need to move before the stillness made me collapse inward. I spotted Callista near the officer's wing, her uniform crisp, her stance stiff. She stood with her back to the door like she was guarding something, or maybe herself. She hadn't seen me until I stepped into her periphery. We locked eyes. For a second, I thought she might say something. Instead, she turned slightly, just enough to pretend I wasn't there. Her lips pressed into a line, no greeting, no flinch, just ice. I stopped in front of her. "You don't owe me an apology," I said evenly. But the silence? That confirms everything. She didn't respond. She didn't even blink, just walked past me like I was a shadow she'd outgrown. Her heels clicked against the tile in perfect rhythm. A rhythm I'd taught her once, back when she still acknowledged I existed. By noon, I was at the on-base housing unit where Irene still stayed. I didn't knock. The door was never locked. She was out back, watering the same flower bed she'd tended since I was a teenager. I watched her move, slow, careful, like the hose was an excuse to avoid looking up. I sat at the patio table and placed the envelope, on the surface between us. She glanced at it, then back to her plants. Eventually, she turned off the water and approached the table. Her eyes landed on the document, lingered. "You made your father look weak," she said, soft but clear. I didn't look away. "He did that himself. I just stopped hiding it for him." Her lips pressed tighter. She didn't sit. She didn't speak again, just turned away and went back to the garden like the conversation had never started. I left without saying goodbye. Walking back to my car, the sun felt hotter than it had that morning. My uniform stuck to the inside of my elbows. Inside the cab, I sat still for a long minute, letting the heat press against my skin. We tell ourselves stories in order to live. Joan Didion wrote that once, but sometimes we stay silent in order to be tolerated. I wasn't going to be tolerated anymore. Back at my temporary quarters, I looked at Irene's message again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I deleted it. I drafted a reply, fingers moving on instinct, but never sent it. I read it once, twice, then erased the draft and logged into my Orion console. In my private log, I updated the entry. Emotional distancing confirmed. Personal ties, non-operative. Proceed tactically. An hour later, I packed everything I owned into 2 bags and checked out of officer housing. No ceremony, no oversight, just absence. That evening, as the sun dipped below the range of beige rooftops and antenna towers, my phone buzzed again. "Jonas, are you okay?" I stared at the screen, thought about what okay meant. I typed back, "I'm not hurt, I'm just finished. No more waiting, no more expecting them to meet me halfway." Sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's the end of trying. 3 days passed, not quietly, not without tremors. I had expected fallout, but not this soon, not this precise. The encrypted ping came through at 07:14, Orion's signature. No banner, no subject line, until I opened it. Classification shift. Report 419B lifted to visible clearance. Inside was a single update, crisp and lethal in its simplicity. This report has been made accessible to strategic leadership networks and command ethics review. There it was, the file they buried, the file that buried me. Now it was breathing fresh air, and it stung. By noon, my inbox was no longer a communication tool. It was a live feed of imploding illusions. Former colleagues who had never once asked where I went were now commenting, some vaguely supportive, others pretending they'd always known something was off. One message stood out from a retired colonel. "Glad the truth has air now. Too long we've let silence wear medals it didn't earn." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. But I bookmarked that one. I hadn't sent the report to make them sorry. I sent it so the silence couldn't stay holy. By late afternoon, Garrett was summoned. Not a formal court, not a military tribunal, just an ethics session, a gathering with quiet power, the kind that decides who gets remembered and who disappears into footnotes. He walked into that room wearing the same jacket he used for TV interviews. He walked out with a different posture, lower, tighter, quieter. I wasn't there to see it happen, but the memo went live that evening. All advisory duties of Colonel Garrett Winslow will conclude effective immediately. No press release, no farewell ceremony, no statement of appreciation. He wasn't stripped. He was erased. Exactly the way he once erased me. He got what he gave me. Removal without fanfare. The next morning, I was reassigned to a transitional oversight role at Fort Sam. I didn't request it. The system moved me there, perhaps as an apology, perhaps as irony, same halls, same base. But this time, when I walked in, heads turned, not out of curiosity, but out of recognition. Even Callista didn't pretend not to see me. She didn't say anything, just nodded once as we passed. Acknowledgement, not invitation. The junior staff greeted me with simple, steady respect. They didn't ask for a speech. I didn't offer one. There was work to be done. On my desk sat a cardboard box labeled Unclaimed Records. Inside were faded papers, personnel files, and my original cadet evaluations, documents I hadn't seen since before the file was rewritten. One was a commendation dated the week before I was pulled out. a commendation I was never told existed. I held it for a long time. The name at the bottom was my first commanding officer. No tears came, just clarity. Not all grief needs an outburst. Sometimes all it needs is validation. When I left the office that evening, the air was sharp with the promise of rain. A young officer approached as I was unlocking my car. "Ma'am," he said, hesitant, "did you mean for all this to happen?" I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't asking to accuse. He was asking to understand. I smiled, just faintly. "No," I said, "but I meant for it to stop being hidden." He nodded and stepped back. I stepped into the sunlight. They thought legacy meant applause. I made it mean truth. The new apartment smelled like paint and emptiness. Nothing stale, nothing nostalgic. It was a blank page with white walls and floors that hadn't learned the echo of footsteps yet. I moved slowly, unpacking one box at a time, folding my uniforms into the closet like they were just another piece of fabric. Not statements, not identities. The medals stayed in their case. I didn't hang them, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't need them to remind me of what I'd survived. Inside the nightstand drawer, locked and untouched for years, was a letter, faded envelope, no return address, handwritten, never opened. I sat on the bed and stared at it for a while. Then I opened it. The handwriting was neat, hesitant, like each word had been rewritten in the writer's head 5 times before touching paper. "Marla, you deserved better. You followed the rules, and we punished you for noticing the ones we broke. I didn't fight it. I didn't back you. They told me it was just protocol, and I let that be enough. You weren't the problem. You were the reminder, and I didn't have the spine to stand with you when it counted. I hope someday you'll understand. I don't expect forgiveness. Just wanted you to know it wasn't your failure. It was mine. No name. But I knew who it was from. My former commanding officer, the one who had watched my file disappear and said nothing. Who'd signed off on paperwork with his head down and his hands shaking. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. Just stillness. Sometimes the truth comes too late to fix anything, but not too late to let go. The next day, as I drank black coffee in the kitchen I barely recognized as mine, another message came through. From Callista. No subject, no explanation, just a short video file. I hesitated, then pressed play. It was from the ceremony. A junior officer, clearly off script, was at the microphone after the crowd had thinned. He read a line that hadn't made it into the official record. "And we thank Colonel Marla Everly for her contribution to this division's legacy." It wasn't polished, it wasn't sanctioned, but it was said. Underneath the video, Callista had written only one line. "You should have always been part of this." I didn't reply. I saved the video into a folder I named Acknowledged. Not forgiven, not forgotten, just acknowledged. The knock on the door came the following morning. Irene. She didn't wait to be invited in. She held something in her hands. A photograph. Old, creased, in black and white. It was me, standing at attention in cadet uniform, looking too young to carry everything I did. She placed it on the table between us. "Your father kept this in a locked drawer," she said softly. I looked at her, not with anger, not with resentment, just clarity. She sat. We didn't speak for a while. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't loaded anymore. It was a pause that belonged to both of us. After a long breath, she said, "He didn't know how to handle you being more than him." I looked at the photo. That wasn't my burden to fix. She nodded once. Then she stood, walked to the door, and left without asking for anything. That afternoon, I sat at my desk and deleted the folder marked Retaliation. I created a new one, Closure. I transferred the files, every scan, every correspondence, every piece of proof. I backed it up to 2 external drives and shut the console for the last time. The flag pin that had once sat framed on my desk, I tucked it into a drawer, not buried, just not on display anymore. We don't have to carry everything we survived. Later, I walked to the coffee shop down the block. No security clearances, no hidden patches in my coat. Just me, hands in my pockets. The barista looked up when I stepped forward. "Marla?" he asked, reading from the cup. I smiled. Not for him, for me. This time, I get to answer without having to explain where I've been. Exactly 1 week after the report was made public, I sent my final letter. Not to a person, not to a family member, but to the military's internal publication. I didn't write it to retaliate. I wrote it to record. I kept it brief, factual, and stripped of emotion. Emotion had done its part. This was something else. I signed it at the bottom. Marla Everly, Colonel, Strategic Oversight. I didn't mention names. I didn't need to. Everyone who mattered already knew. The letter ended with a single sentence. What we allow to stay silent becomes the next generation's truth. I chose not to allow it. By the end of that day, Garrett Winslow's name was quietly removed from all veteran advisory panels. No headlines, no photos, just a short memo. We acknowledge procedural anomalies in historical reporting and affirm our commitment to integrity. No one said his name, but the erasure was louder than anything they could have printed. 2 days later, Callista requested a transfer. Off base, off radar, no dramatic exits, just a clean shift in assignment. She stepped away from every public-facing role she held, voluntarily, they said. She left her medals behind. I found out through someone on the admin staff, said she placed them in a plain envelope on the front desk. The note inside read, "I earned these under the wrong history. I need to earn something else now." She didn't send it to me. She didn't have to. Some truths don't need direction. They find the right desk on their own. 2 weeks later, I cleared my office. I didn't leave anything behind except a single sealed envelope on the center of the desk. It was labeled, "For the next one, they try to forget." No ceremony, no escort, no photos on the wall, just me walking out. A junior officer, the same one who'd saluted me outside the hall weeks ago, stood at the doorway. This time, he didn't salute. He just held the door open and said, "Ma'am." I nodded. That was enough. My walk across the parking lot that afternoon was the lightest I'd felt in years. I didn't leave behind my career. I carried it with me, no longer for display, but for direction. 4 days later, a box arrived at my door, Jonas's handwriting on the label, no return address. Inside was a single item, a framed print of the original commendation roster from my cadet year, photographed and restored. My name underlined, Everly M. No message, no signature, just that. I hung it in the hallway, not where guests could see it, just where I could. Not to remember what they tried to erase, but to remember that I outlasted their silence. And I didn't need their permission to do it. I wasn't here to be their redemption arc. I was the reminder that some of us were erased, not because we failed, but because we refused to disappear quietly. The last time anyone saw me in uniform, I wasn't wearing it for them. Now, I walk into a modest civilian building in the heart of town. No plaque outside, no title above the door. Just a laminated sign that reads, Mentorship Series, Rebuilding from Truth. In my hands is a folder, no ribbons, no seals, just printouts, curriculum drafts, and handwritten notes on what it means to be visible, even when it's uncomfortable. The chair behind the desk is plastic. The coffee machine sputters like it's barely alive. but the energy in the room is honest. It smells like paper and ambition. I'm not here to be thanked. I'm here to make sure no one else has to be rewritten to be recognized. If they wanted my silence, they should have built a legacy strong enough to survive my voice.